Bethesda just dropped the second episode of Into the Starfield, and this is pretty much the biggest info drop we've gotten on Starfield since E3 of last year, including what seems to actually be some of the first in-game gameplay of Starfield. We had the in-engine teaser, but this seems like it is just actual gameplay in-game, and even sort of leaked a few days ago thanks to the good old YouTube playlist trick. With that said, let's break down Into the Starfield Episode 2, Made for Wanderers, because there are certainly some very interesting things stated during this. They describe how they're targeting a level of immersion with Starfield that you aren't just playing a game, but actually living in this world and universe, or at least feeling like you're living in this world and universe. It's described as a giant open world for the player to do what they want and feel like you have an impact on the world itself, not only being a blank slate for you to actually do things, but the world will react to what you do. In the past, Todd Howard described Starfield as having one of the biggest engine upgrades Bethesda Game Studios has ever done. I've speculated pretty much continuously since that I think they are going to make big upgrades to the AI in Starfield. How NPCs act and react to you, and just how all of the world comes together. Things like fully simulated economies and other very unique and world-changing interactions. Bethesda describes here how they don't just make RPGs, they make simulations where lots of crazy stuff can happen. And Bethesda has this mantra of kind of embracing the chaos and trying to account for things like combat breaking out at pretty much any point. You just think about that. What's going to happen if you just start shooting up an area where most players would probably just continue talking or continue the quest normally? This is something they are continuing to consider with Starfield, really continuing that sandbox-like nature, which is obviously a very good sign. And one of the more interesting quotes is from Todd Howard himself, where he does say,
"And it's nice with Starfield to go back to some things we didn't do, the backgrounds, the traits, the defining your character, all of those stats."
And he goes on to say that there are a ton of games doing things like that with backgrounds, traits, and defining your character with stats, but they are taking this opportunity to go back to the old style of hardcore RPGs, but in a new and perhaps more refined way. And they further go on to describe how they have severely leveled up the ability to create interesting characters. There's going to be technology based on scanning real-world models, this applying to the actual character creation visually, and this will not only apply to how you make your own character look, but there's going to be a whole additional level of detail for other NPCs, so you feel like you are actually interacting with real people in Starfield, or at least it seems like that's what they're going for. Who knows if they'll actually hit that. There's a couple of very interesting takeaways and interpretations from all of this, these quotes around this expanded or advanced character creation overall. I'm pretty curious to see what this actually entails. They describe this additional level of character creation from a visual standpoint, and we saw a character from the in-engine trailer, and it didn't really look crazy to me. It kind of looked like a character from a more modern Bethesda game. I'm pretty curious to see what they mean by this additional level of depth, and really their quote of severely leveled up the ability to create interesting characters outside of just making them look better or giving you additional customization options, or perhaps that is all they mean. But it seems like here they are really introducing a level of depth that we simply have never seen in a Bethesda game, or at least none of the more modern ones, as far as the background and stats of your character from the creation stage. One thing that does get me excited is how they talk about hardcore RPGs, basically like a thing of their past. If you look at the modern game slate and if you look at Bethesda games, they're not hardcore RPGs. There are hardcore RPGs out there where you could spend literally hours just customizing the backstory and starting stats and equipment of your character. And the way they're referring to this as something in the past and not really recognizing their own more current games as those types of hardcore RPGs, again, gets me really excited. The return to traits with their own unique pros and cons is also exciting. I bet the backgrounds will be almost like past occupations or perhaps current occupations, but more on that in a moment. And these will probably have blanket changes to your character, giving you certain abilities or removing certain abilities or affecting your stats in one way or another. But either way, just based how they talk about this overall, it definitely seems like this will have more depth than what we saw in Skyrim or with the special system in Fallout. They go over some of the various factions that are going to pop up in Starfield. We have the United Colonies, which are basically going to be the future space republic idealized. the people that are rich with big cities or seemingly being rich with big cities. The Freestar Collective are going to be the people out on the frontier. We get an image of Aquila here and some of the more uncolonized aspects of this world or universe. Ryujin Industries is all about the corporate life. They mention how it actually has one of the best starts of any factions and how you'll almost have to apply for a job here and see if you could make it. We get another look at the Crimson Fleet Pirates, a group of pirates harassing the United Colonies as well as the Freestar Collective, as we have seen in this design document, but we'll actually have the choice to join them, or alternatively, we can report back to our superiors and kind of turn them in, be a space cop as they describe it here. Something they discuss here that they may be introducing as a feature is multiple starts, as in multiple different locational starts, potentially based on that backstory they discussed before. They say how that Ryujin Industries and this corporate lifestyle has one of the most interesting starts, and maybe they almost mean like life paths from Cyberpunk. You will literally be starting in a different place depending on what you pick. Could be an interesting mechanic and an interesting change up on your experience with the game overall. If Starfield does have this quite vast universe and several planets to experience, it could be interesting if, let's say, you just start off on a completely industrialized one with a ton of industry versus one that's not really that colonized, where it is more of a frontier city and the quests that lead out of that. Although if you do want to tame your expectations, turn the hype down a little bit, they also could just mean the start off with that faction, your initial introduction to them, and perhaps Starfield will continue the Bethesda trend of a pretty standard singular start for everyone, but a lot of avenues to explore immediately once getting in the game. Describe how they recognize with their games that the story we tell ourselves through our experiences, as well as the story we get via our companions, tend to be the most memorable part of these games, and how in Starfield they are leaning into that and how other characters feel about us. While exploring, your companion makes comments on things that happen or discoveries being made. This occurs to some degree in Fallout 4 also. There's definitely a certain subset of unique interactions you could have depending on the companion you do have, but it's fairly minimal, a base level implementation of this, and I wouldn't be shocked if in Starfield it's greatly expanded. In Fallout 4, there's even mods that give a lot more depth to this. But having an additional level of interactions with companions is definitely a good thing, going to just make it feel like we are more and more attached to these people. And since we know romance will be a thing in this game, perhaps in more ways than one, we also see what is seemingly some of the first proper gameplay, or at least in-game gameplay of this game, as we have this shot with Vasco. Honestly, it's incredibly simple, which does kind of leave a bit of ambiguity. Is this just an in-engine shot, or is this proper gameplay? It feels like proper gameplay, but it's honestly hard to tell.
Hello, Captain. How may I be of assistance?
There isn't much to take out of this. We could hear Vasco's voice as well as just get a good shot at him, but it's pretty dark and it looks like we're at the bottom of a ship with very little lighting. The darkness definitely seems deliberate to obscure any of the larger details here, but you can see some of the shadowing and even God rays, which do look nice. We don't know right now if Starfield will or won't have ray tracing in the future. One of the more specific features they discuss here that gets me pretty excited is the persuasion minigame. They describe how this is going to have similar beats to the Oblivion system, although it's not intently based off the Oblivion system. It's just kind of coincidence that they work similarly. And when you're trying to persuade someone in Starfield, you're going to have to consider things like, what is my risk here? Which options do you want to choose? Obviously, it's not a system that has a clear right answer. It's designed to make you feel like you are having a genuine conversation with another NPC, but you are actually persuading someone of what to say. And they feel it's actually one of the most successful in-dialogue systems they have. So I imagine this means that rather than having dialogue choices that are clearly speech checks with colors based on success chance, you'll be going through dialogue and must pick the right thing to actually get through. Like, you'll just be talking to someone and you'll probably have broad choices. Maybe you could appeal to things like humor, romance, strength, money, etc. And you don't necessarily know which of these choices will be most successful with another NPC, but there's probably a lot of context clues based on who that character is and you getting to know them. And I imagine this will be very rewarding if you actually spend more time looking for clues beforehand or getting more in depth with some of the optional dialogue choices. It is interesting though, and it definitely is pretty exciting to get a more natural or organic style of persuasion, not just, do you have a high enough charisma stat, congrats, you passed this skill check. But as you saw in the background, one of the other big parts of this video overall is the new concept art shared all throughout it. We get to look at these two ships that do seem to be somewhat new, a bit of a different design than most of the others, and definitely a different design than our personal ship we've seen numerous times now. Looks like there's some new planets in the background as well. To me, it just kind of seems like these are going to be enemy ships or a different faction ship, quite distinguishable from what else is there. To me, this is easily one of the coolest screenshots or piece of concept art we have gotten to date. It's actually now my desktop wallpaper. Looks like an ice, or really to me, I think it may be a man-made planet of sorts with a moon or additional planet in close orbit. We've of course seen other ice planets before, but I feel like if you look and zoom in on the ground of this one, it looks mechanical. It's kind of hard to tell. It's pretty crude with it being concept art and all, but it almost looks like a partially destroyed mechanical base. Maybe we're on top of a structure. Maybe it's a man-made asteroid, or we're mining on an asteroid. This picture to me is very interesting. It seems to be us in our familiar ship, but with some changes. The top part here is definitely different than some of the past concept arts. The ship overall does seem to have a few minor changes from concept art or image to image. It almost looks like there could be a gun on the front here. But most importantly, our ships literally landing into a canyon continue to prod that question as to whether Starfield will have freely controlled player flyable ships. Can I actually fly around these spaceships in this game? There's a lot of things that suggest yes, the entire trailer sequence actually being a spaceship taking off and a focus on the controls and systems. And you have concept art like this where we're flying into a canyon. Yeah, this could just be an animation, but it definitely does beg the question, is there going to be player controlled ships? The next image almost looks like it could be in the canyon or ravine. Looks very alien, like there's some bizarre material or substance on the walls here. Not a ton to actually take away from this one, just an interesting exploration pick. Conversely here, we have a look at a warehouse that could be on a larger ship and somebody working on machinery or perhaps working on an engine, it almost looks like. I think this is going to be a United Colonies location. It seems like the United Colonies may have this orange accent of sorts. We've seen it in a few other images. And this image overall is curious. It is clearly a train station, and the groups here are quite diverse. We have what looks like soldiers, some scientists, maintenance workers, or maybe someone working in a biolab. Are these worlds going to be so large where we actually have to use train stations to get from one section to another? That could be interesting. The landscape layout with Starfield is one of the things I am most curious about. I kind of expected a work similar to the Outer Worlds, where you have certain hub locations you could travel to on a planet, basically partial open worlds around individual planets, but perhaps some of these planets will just be full open world locations, like one planet is the full location. This is easily one of the most high detail pieces of concept art we've had thus far, and it looks like it's a high detail shot of Neon, the planet where you get high on fish, and you could even see fish on the bottom there. To me, one of the most standout features of this is how familiar it looks. This could just be a modern day offshore oil plant. Even the boats don't look that futuristic, although we do have a big alien scary fish on the side here. I could see this red tint represented on this person on the boat, likely going to be a faction symbol of some kind or representative of the workers here. The shot of walking through a market is pretty cool. You see an interesting lizard on the side and what seems to be a scrap vendor of some kind. Gives a completely different vibe and in general kind of a completely different level of wealth than some of these other screenshots. They're still urban-esque areas, but this one just looks like it is way poorer compared to many of the others we have seen. We get a look at what is the outside of Aquila, or at least it seems that way. That's the frontier city we got a dedicated short video on. It was described in that video how the outskirts of Aquila and really outside of the walls is pretty dangerous, and we see that represented here, but they also describe the Ashta, alien predators that are crossed between a wolf and a velociraptor. And you have to imagine these are the Ashta on the wall, both in the actual wall art and the skeletons. They look very similar to these aliens we saw from past concept art, although they don't really look like a velociraptor or a wolf, but perhaps that's describing their behavior and not actually their appearance. And overall, considering we seemingly have the same type of alien in these two very different looking biomes, it does raise the question again, how many different biomes will there be per planet? Even on the Aquila image, you could see what look like snow-topped mountains in the distance, but in the foreground, you have what looks like more lush greenery. Overall, throughout these images, that was one of the biggest standouts to me. There is a wide variety of differing landscapes. If these all end up getting to be different in-game locations, there's going to be a lot of them. Even if it's just the concept art thus far, you can count quite a bit, quite diverse locations to experience in Starfield. And with how much of a focus they are describing to be on world reactivity, you have to imagine these different places will probably have their own mini subcultures and unique interactions with each of them, perhaps even just a unique vibe as you go there. Overall, this video definitely boosts my hype for Starfield in general. I'm incredibly excited for this game, and every time we get a look at it, it just gets me a bit more excited as we start to fill in some of those blank boxes, at least a little bit. Hopefully you guys found this one informative. Hopefully you found it interesting. With that said, as always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.